Thank you. Good morning to all. I'd like to call this hearing to order and acknowledge that we're in Treaty 1 territory, the home and the traditional lands of the Ojibwe, the Cree, Dakota people, and the national homeland of the River Métis. Our drinking water comes from Shoal Lake 40 First Nation in Treaty 3 territory. My name is Ron Merritt. I'll be your chairperson this morning. Introducing the panel members who are on Zoom is Miss Diane Knight and Mr. Richard Whitbread, and our recording secretary is Sally Cofield. Representing the City of Winnipeg from the Assessment Department is Mr. Ryan Valderrama. This morning we'll be hearing applications for revision of the assessment roll in accordance with the Municipal Assessment Act. The matters for which revision is requested and described in each application, and we will limit discussions to those matters. The statements that are made at this hearing are sworn testimony, and anybody speaking these matters must be sworn in. Please be advised that comparisons of assessments of properties are not considered evidence of market value by the Board of Revision. The board is appointed annually by City Council and is independent of it, along with the city administration. We make decisions based on the evidence provided at that hearing and issue a written order that will be mailed to all parties as soon as possible. Please note that the board decision in respect to application may be appealed to the members of a municipal board if the matter pertains to assessed value or classification, or to Court of King's Bench if the matter pertains to application for exemption from taxation. Should you wish to appeal, information on how to do so will be included in the board's order. In respect to the hearing this morning, I will confirm the points of appeal with your property be addressed with each applicant. Following the swearing in, we'll then have the assessor's testimony followed by questions that the applicant may have. Then it'll be the applicant's testimony followed by questions. Each party will have the opportunity to summarize if they wish. Once all evidence about the application is brought forward, the applicant may leave. The process will repeat for each item on the docket this morning. The session will close after all the applications have been heard, and the board will deliberate in private and make its decisions. You will receive the board's order by registered mail as soon as possible. As information, all public hearings are live stream recorded and will be part of the record. This morning we'll be hearing items 3 and 4 on the docket. So, Ms. Caulfield, can you swear in or affirm the assessor and the applicant's testimony? Thank you.
Mr. Assessor, please state your full name.
Ryan Valderrama.
Do you affirm that the evidence you are about to give at this hearing is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you. Mr. Applicant, please state your full name.
My name is Jarrett Story.
Do you affirm that the evidence you are about to give at this hearing is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes, I do.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. So we have really one property with a 2022 and a 2023 appeal. This is the funeral home for the Hebrew sick people, or pardon me, the Hebrew Association. And I understand there are some points of appeal with this property, one being liability and the other one being classification, and the last one being quantum. Is that correct, gentlemen?
That is correct, Mr. Chair. However, we will only be pursuing the appeal on class code and liability. So we will not be pursuing any adjustment to the actual value, but rather we will focus our efforts this morning on discussing the issues of class code and liability.
All right. So I think, Mr. Valderrama, you can read this property, which is 1023 Main Street, into the roll, and then we will go to the liability side. So, Mr. Valderrama, whenever you're ready.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. The first file that we have has a file number of 23 2023-518. The roll number is 14022000000, and it is located at 1023 Main Street. So we're dealing with roll year 2022 with the reference year of April 1st, 2028. The assessed value is 1,188,000 with a classification of other and a liability of taxable. And for 20, let me just go with the 2023 as well, Mr. Chair, for the interest of time. Yeah, the file number is 23-519. And the roll number is 14022000000. Again, it is located at 1023 Main Street. It has a roll year of 2023 with the reference date of April 1st, 2021. The assessed value, sorry, excuse me. The assessed value is $1,265,000 and a classification of other property with a liability of taxable.
I thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Story, thank you. Mr. Story, any questions in regard to what you just heard? And then we'll get into the liability side.
Nope, those details appear correct from what I can see. So we're good to talk about liability whenever you're ready, Mr. Chair.
So, Mr. Story, the floor is going to be yours, and you're going to be seeking the liability side. So you may proceed, sir.
Thank you, sir. Okay, as Mr. Valderrama has pointed out, we are indeed at 1023 Main Street. Now, this is the east side of Main, between Manitoba Avenue and Magnus Avenue. And Mr. Chair, you'd pointed out that it is related to, well, you mentioned the Hebrew Sikh benefit, but it is indeed Hesed Shalemus Association of Winnipeg. So they are a non-profit burial society. Deeply rooted in the Orthodox tradition of preparing bodies for Orthodox burial. So one of the issues that we have here is that the city classifies this property as a funeral home, and that's fine. I understand. We have a chapel and a mortuary. However, it's imperative to note that this property is not a licensed funeral home. All funeral homes that, when we think of funeral homes, for example, down this street in the North End, we have Wojcik, we have Corbin, we have Kropo. Those are all licensed funeral homes, and they provide certain services, cremation, embalming, those sorts of things. None of that happens here at Hesed Shalemus. At Hesed Shalemus, everything that goes on is the ritual preparation of the deceased in accordance with Orthodox or halakhic law. If you look on my page 3, please, that's under the heading Property Site Maps and Photographs. You can see a photo of the building. Now, I will refer to it as the building or the complex because indeed it is one complex. There are 2 addresses on the roll. But really what is led to this appeal is the supplementary issued for the new property on the south side of the parcel. So that's on the right. You can see that's clearly the newer addition. And so this is the preparation area that is replacing the former preparation area. The chapel on the left is fully exempt. And that's where the actual, the funeral, let's say, in the chapel takes place. However, some of the elements of the funerary service does indeed take place in the new addition. So we are simply asking that the exemption that is currently being applied to the chapel be extended to the addition to the property. It doesn't, from our perspective, it's not equitable to have half a property exempt and then half of it not exempt. I visited the property. It was exactly, well, almost exactly 2 weeks to the day, toured the entire facility, spoke with the board member, the executive director, and we have a very good sense of what goes on here. So I can tell you that on the right-hand side of this property, that's the preparation room where the ritual of Tahara takes place. There's also the ritual of Shamrim, which is sitting with the deceased, and that is from the time of death until the time of burial. So clearly that is not a service that is offered at any other funeral home. This is just in line with the Jewish Orthodox religious rules. This is also, the folks who carry out this work are called the Hevra Kaddish, which translates from Hebrew to Holy Society. And these are the folks who are trained to prepare the body in a ritual way. They're volunteers, they're trained on site. There are other training opportunities and community events that go on in this building on the right. But all this to say that everything that goes on in this entire complex, in the chapel and in the new addition, is indeed based on religious worship or acts of devotion, veneration, and religious observance. In fact, I'm not sure that there are any goings on in this building that are secular. It's all quite dictated by, again, halakhic rule. I've included a short write-up here. I think I've effectively touched on everything. One thing I want to point out, though, while we're looking at the complex, I did note that while I inspected the property, the chapel does not have its own washroom facilities. So from a purely sort of mechanical perspective, if you were to attempt to gain an occupancy permit for the chapel on its own, it would not likely be granted, as it requires the washroom facilities of the new addition, which is the property under appeal. I just wanted to point that out. There's a lot of, I've been studying this for some time. There's a lot of information, so I'll try to get as much in as I can. And if you need to interrupt me at any point, please feel free. On page 5, we talk about the section under which we are requesting the exemption. And it simply says that the conditions that must be met is that the property is a church, a synagogue, or place of religious worship. Now, again, the chapel is exempted as a place of religious worship, and the new addition, from our perspective, satisfies this condition as well. And again, everything that goes on in this addition is indeed based on an act of religious observance. I mentioned that the Hesed Shalemis is indeed a charity. They're a registered charity. On page 6, you can see from the federal government, this is their charitable details page, and it does indeed say that they're a charitable organization dedicated to the advancement of religion, that religion, of course, being Judaism, and the address is 1023 Main Street. Now, on that same record from Hesed Shalemis, it says on page 7, when they self-describe, they say, "We perform religious rites for the Jewish community in accordance with Orthodox Jewish traditions, laws, customs, and practices. We recruit, train, and supervise volunteers who perform these rites as prescribed Jewish tradition. We operate a chapel to provide services in accordance with traditional customs, public education materials, and hold workshops on all aspects of death and mourning practice according to Jewish tradition." I mentioned very quickly, we'll go to page 8 and 9. I mentioned the 1027. Now that's the chapel. The owner doesn't see this as two separate buildings. They see it as one complex, as they should. We've walked through it, and you can see that it is indeed one compound. I had asked the city if they would be amenable to merging these roles. It doesn't really make logical sense to have two different civic addresses and two different roles for this property, as it operates as one. But this is the situation that we're in with the issuance of the supplementary. So that's included there. You can see that 1027 Main has been applied the PIICH, which is the place of worship code. They tag it as church, but all houses of worship in the city are applied that code. And you can see very clearly that the funeral home code has been attached to 1023. I will point out, I went through all of the licensed funeral homes in Winnipeg. There are 24, and that's typically what we see on the assessor's roll. I don't believe that there is another property such as ours that has been applied the use code that is commensurate with a private market non-denominational funeral homes. So I understand that that may be a line of best fit, but in terms of the treatment of the property for taxation purposes, that is a distortion. In terms of my appendix, you can see the interior of the property. You can see the chapel. We can see the loading area. There's a very, very small loading door, and that is where the deceased enters the property and exits on the way to burial. And that is, of course, part of the new addition. Just to illustrate further that this all operates as one large unit. You can see the preparation room on page 15, the bottom picture. You'll notice behind the fellow on the left that those are the prayers that are on the wall, and these are the prayers that are recited throughout the process of the tahara, the ritual purification of the deceased. I've included a fair bit of information about Hesed Shalemis and Jewish funeral practices, and that's all included for your perusal. I won't read it all to you. It's there, and you can certainly see that effectively this is a not-for-profit group. They are mandated to provide Jewish funeral rites in the Orthodox tradition, and we therefore believe that everything that goes on in both parts of this property should best be classified as acts of devotion or religious observance. And then finally, we have, well, actually, the city has included the Winnipeg Free Press article. I didn't include it for 22 as its post reference, but I did include it for 23. I assume that our discussion for 23 will be very, very similar, if not exactly the same for 23 as it is for 22. But I will point out that they spell out very clearly in this article that Hesed Shalemis does not embalm bodies, and the organization is not a licensed funeral home, but a non-profit religious society that performs a ritual service. So it's a very unique property. There's not another one like it, certainly not in Winnipeg. I know of others in Alberta, and there are certainly some in Ontario and Quebec, but this is a very unique property with a unique use. So I understand how the city may have fallen under their radar, but as we look very closely at it, I think it's quite obvious that this is a place where acts of religious observance occur. And I believe it should be treated in that manner, and it should be treated equitably as a complex. We should not have one half of it exempt and one half not. Now, in terms of trying to find what I'll call comparables or similar cases, it was very, very difficult. However, I did find one property. It's on the corner of Hartford and McGregor, and it's an old synagogue. It also has a mikveh, Shabbat Lubavitch mikveh, on site. And these are two separate freestanding buildings, and they are both exempt. Now, a mikveh, by definition, is a pool of water used for ritual purification. And that is exactly what is going on. Now, it's obviously we have this element of end of life, but effectively, the ritual that goes on there is the ritual cleansing and purification, tahara. And so that is the best comparable I can find. And it is indeed two separate, not conjoined buildings on the same roll and both completely exempt. So it took some hunting to find that, but I did indeed find that property. And fortunately, it is fairly close. It's in West Kildonan, but this, I think, broadly we would call all of this the north end. So I think I will leave it there, and I'm happy to take any of your questions, and I thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Story. Mr. Valderrama, questions of Mr. Story?
Yeah, excuse me. Sorry, Mr. Chair. Yes, I do. Just a few. First question. In the subject property, which is assessed as a funeral home, are there any regular worship services being held in this property or in the vicinity?
Are there regular worship services happening in the body preparation area?
In the subject property.
Right, and by regular, do you mean scheduled?
I believe the Jewish faith has their regular worship services. I'm just not familiar when during the week, but do they hold it there?
No. So what they do here,
So it's a no. Okay.
excuse me, hold on.
Yeah.
What they do here is they perform the rituals for end of life. So it's not synagogue service. It's not that sort of thing. It is operational regularly as people pass away. So obviously it's not scheduled, but rather is used on an as needed basis as folks who are observant of the conservative or Orthodox part of Judaism are as they pass away. So it's not a it's not every Saturday night they have a service. That's not the point. The point is that it's the ritual preparation, the ritual purification of the deceased in accordance with halakhic law. So that is what goes on here.
Okay. Next, I guess it's more of a follow-up question. Does the subject property has its own membership or congregation that holds services regularly?
Well, again, it does have a congregation, and those again are the folks who are observant of the level of orthodoxy in Judaism. So it does indeed have a congregation, and I think I've answered the question that it's not it's not a matter of having scheduled services, but frankly, the act of ritual purification is an observance of religious custom. Otherwise, it would not be done. That is the reason that this property exists, and they've been doing it since about 1933. So this is something of a North End institution, let's say.
Okay. Would you be familiar with any church, for this matter, that has an attached funeral home?
Am I
Aside from
aware?
this one, of course.
Well, I know that I don't know where they're at, but in terms of when you say church, can we
Church
mean
that
broadly
holds regular
place-
services, that regularly holds worship services, and similar services.
So, but just to be very clear, we're not talking explicitly about a Christian or Catholic church. We're talking about a place of worship, correct?
In general.
Okay. So, no, I don't know of any churches that have a funeral home or a licensed funeral home. I know that certainly funerary services are performed at churches and then other places of worship. And I do know that I don't know where exactly the project is what stage they're at, but I do know that there was talk about creating an Islamic ritual burial type component to the mosque on Waverly, but I'm not sure exactly how that relates. I think ultimately that we're suggesting that the goings on in the subject property clearly constitute acts of religious observance. So regardless of what other churches are doing, I don't know that that's material to the discussion.
Okay. How about you mentioned a lot of other funeral homes around the area. Do these funeral homes have funeral chapels? Again, in general.
Sure. So I can speak, unfortunately, to Kropo. I've been there a number of times, and they certainly do have what we'll call a non-denominational chapel. But I think it's important that if we look at the funeral homes that are licensed with the province, you require a license to operate a funeral home. You require a license to be a funeral director. You require a license to be an embalmer. Those are different. They also sell their services. So they sell the actual funerary service. They'll sell packages that include transportation, sometimes flowers, catering, other items like urns and caskets. That's a private business. Our folks are not running a business. It's a not-for-profit. And in fact, in under the Talmud, one is not to profit from the death of another. So it would actually be completely counter to the religious law to profit from funerary service. So I see what you're saying. I understand that. Sure, we have a chapel and a mortuary. However, the business of the private funeral home world is worlds apart from ritual preparation and washing of the deceased. There's no cosmetology that goes on here. There's no embalming. There's nothing invasive. It's simply the washing of the body and the reciting of the prayers. So very different from what we'd find at a Cropo, at a Corbin, at a Wojcik, or across the Redwood Bridge at Voyages.
Okay. Next question. Is the use of the property exclusively for funeral services?
No, it's not exclusively for funeral services. They also do training. So I know that they run what are called death cafes. That's for the benefit of the community, where they have open and frank discussions about death. They host children from Gray's Academy to talk about the Jewish religious rules and practices, traditions and customs around death. I know that they recently hosted the mortuary sciences folks to talk about the Jewish traditions and customs around death. So no, what I would say they do is twofold, but it is all indeed with the aim of the advancement of the Orthodox Jewish religion.
In terms of death and how to deal with death, correct?
Around issues of death, yes. Well, and they also have, forgive me, the word is it's a Hebrew word, but it's effectively they also organize the community where they collect all of the sacred texts and on an as-needed basis they perform the ritual burial of texts that include the name of the divine, as those are not to be destroyed. So they have other functions in the community, but the work of the Hevra Kaddish and the rituals prior to burial are the main function, I suppose, though it's not the exclusive function.
So just to clarify, the activities aside from funeral services are all revolving around death and how to prepare or preparing the loved ones that are left behind with.
Nope, it all revolves around religious law and custom. So
of course,
and that can't be separated. So it is everything that happens here is an act of veneration, observance, worship, or an expression of faith. And yes, it is around death. Yeah,
their religious tradition around death. Correct. Just to simplify it.
The ritual around death in the Orthodox Jewish tradition.
Right.
Yes.
Okay. In terms of the this is, as mentioned, this is a SUP. So there's a permit filed, of course, or pulled to construct the building. Was it for a funeral parlor or a church? For the subject property, we're talking about the subject property.
Right. So I think it says funeral parlor, and that's fine. Now, who in your is that someone from the city who simply writes down funeral parlor, or how does that?
It's an application, so I'm not familiar with the process. However, it seems that I'm looking at other churches as well on when they are built, what type of work is being done. For example, this one, I see that it is a funeral parlor, so I'm trying to confirm with you if the permit filed is for a funeral parlor or a church.
Yeah, I think it's in your evidence that the permit says funeral parlor, but I don't see how that is that doesn't take away from the fact that what is going on here is religious in nature. That's sort of immaterial.
Okay, I think that's all the questions I have, Mr. Chair, and I have some rebuttals to present.
All right, we'll deal with that. Okay. We will deal with that shortly.
Sure.
I thank you. Ms. Knight, questions of Mr. Story?
Yeah, so if you're looking at a funeral chapel that does every religion except Jewish, is that chapel then taxable or non-taxable?
A private market funeral home where anyone can walk in off the street, those are taxable. Yeah, they're fully taxable.
Okay, so that would be like your Glen Eden, your Glen Lawn, all
Yes.
those places.
Precisely.
And so the difference between that and this place is
Yes.
that this is a ritual that is done for the in the 24 hours or whatever I can't remember if you said that or not,
Right.
but in that time frame for that person to be ready for burial.
Yes. So yeah, exactly. So I think it's typically, and I'm just have been reading about this, but I think it's within 2 days typically is the rule. But it's a great question because so just to back up, anyone can walk in off the street and go to, Wojcik or Corbin or Kropo. These are all in the immediate vicinity of Hesed Shalemus. And you purchase a package, and that may be the room rental, that may include catering, that might include transportation to a crematorium, that might involve embalming services, that might involve cosmetic work.
Right.
That's the what we'll call the regular market world of private market funeral homes. So the similarity, and I think where Mr. Valderrama is maybe conflating things here. The similarity is that we have a mortuary effectively at both places. So there are deceased in each of these types of places. The difference is at Hesed Shalemus, there's no cosmetics, there's no cremation. In fact, it's forbidden. Embalming is forbidden.
Right, because that's the Jewish faith.
Precisely. Right? And during the preparation, it is simply a group of volunteers known as the Holy Society who wash the body in a special manner using a mikveh, using the purified water, and saying the psalms and prayers, and then sitting with the body until such time as it is interred. So it's very different procedurally from the private market firms, and it's also different from the fact that they're operating for a profit, where our folks are a religious society who are not making a profit.
So if you look at a church, say an Anglican church, where they do funerals, and the body comes to the funeral ready for procession to the burial ground, it's been to a place where a funeral home at that point where it's gotten ready for burial and everything was done to get it ready for burial. The difference being that there is no cremation, no fluid injected into the person, no anything done to that person. In the Jewish faith, it's just washed and prayed over and ready for burial.
Effectively, yes. There are a number of other little parts of the ritual in terms of the dressing and that sort of thing. Yeah. But yes, you're quite right. There's no
one is a faith process that's done in the Jewish tradition, and one is just a getting ready for burial in any religion is similar, but then it could still be satisfied with a service in the church that would be okay.
Yeah, that's
right. I think I understand the differences, but okay. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Mr. Whitbread?
Yes, I have a couple. The first building was built in 1947, the second built in 2022, if I understand your evidence, correct?
That is correct. Just so we're clear though, there was a preparation facility that was part of this complex that was torn down, and the new one was built.
Okay, that's where I was going, Mr. Story. So in the 1947 portion of the building, there is currently no preparation capacity.
You are correct. There's also no washroom. So it is relying on this auxiliary or addition to the property to fulfill its function as a chapel. That is correct.
Right. So it looks like the 1947 building is about twice as large as the 2022 building. Does that sound about right?
That looks about right. Yeah.
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 When I look at your photos. So all of the activities that are performed in the new building are the activities that were performed in the previous building that was torn down.
That is correct.
Okay.
Yes.
And was that premise taxable?
It was never appealed. It was never reviewed. We've had some discussions about it. Now, I think perhaps why it was not a concern is the assessment was extremely low. It was $100,000 or less for many, many years.
Mhm.
So I suppose that, in my opinion, it should have been. It always should have been treated as one complex. Since the time they built so they acquired the property in 1933. They did fundraising for many years, and they built the chapel in 1947. And since that time, this property has been operating as one unit, effectively.
And if
But
I could
it-
ask you,
yeah,
sorry, let
go
me
ahead.
interrupt you.
Yes, sir.
So that building that was torn down was part of the original 47 structure?
It predates the 47, actually. I believe it was
even-
from the 20s, if I'm not mistaken. But yes, it was sort of a historic, older building on Main Street. So they had purchased that property. I believe it was in 1933. If memory serves, it was from about maybe 1910, 1920, somewhere in that range. And they elected to effectively replace it in the modern era because it was too small, and there's some safety concerns. We can imagine this is a bit of a tough spot on Main Street between Manitoba and Magnus. So they once again they went and they fundraised and they built this new addition to replace the old preparation area. So that's the history in a nutshell.
And was it a one-story or two-story building?
It was a one-story building, I believe. I believe it was
It had-
one story. I'm almost certain it had a false front on it, so it's hard to say. I'm not exactly sure. I'm inclined to believe it was a one-story, but I could be wrong. But it was a private residence at some point originally, and then it was converted
So it would have
for their
had
use.
washrooms.
It had yes, it had washrooms, and the basement of the chapel had washrooms, but they've been long decommissioned, as my understanding.
And was there access, as there is now, from that building to the chapel?
I was never in the old building, but I believe so. I'm inclined to believe it was, but I can't speak to whether or not the degree of well, it's seamless now. If you're in the property, you feel as though you're in one building. You go from the chapel to the addition seamlessly. There's no it feels as though you're in one building with a number of little premises. But I was never in the old building, so I can't say with certainty. But I believe that yes, you could pass between both the older house and the chapel.
Okay, when you say seamlessly, it appears that there are large doors, 2 or 3 sets of large doors from the chapel to the new building. Does
Right.
it not? Or am I
Yes.
not seeing this properly?
Yeah, no, there are doors, but it does not. I suppose the point that I'm trying to communicate is that it feels as though you're in one. It doesn't feel as though you're in two buildings.
Okay.
They're attached. So when the assessor issued a separate roll for this property, it was a bit odd because it is, again, you might call it a complex, but it does function as one property. They have one address that they use. So from my perspective, it is one building with an older chapel and a newer addition.
Mhm. So at any time in your knowledge, was there ever a fee charged for the preparation of body for burial?
Well, they're nonprofit, so I actually asked the executive director. She does not charge or bill people. She collects from the I believe it's the funeral homes or the cemeteries, And it is a charge that is commensurate with continuing their operation. So it's not for profit. It's only to ensure that their work continues. So they do not direct bill, I suppose, is the answer.
All right. So if I take a body for preparation as a private citizen or a member of that congregation, I do not have to make any payment to the facility for the preparation of that body. Now, obviously, fees for burial and plot and all the rest of it.
Right.
It's another matter that's not tied into this.
That's not what they do. That's correct. And I should point out, Mr. Whipper, that's I'm glad you mentioned that. They also they will not deny any member of the faith burial based on financial hardship. So that is a big part of their mission. So for folks who do not have the financial wherewithal to pay the tribute, they will not have there will be no fee for those folks. So
yeah. I see the wall of contributors is very huge in the main chapel. So they're relying on contributions, it looks like, to make their business work.
Yes. And that wall is actually right. That wall is, I believe it's from 1947. So that's actually, there was many years of the ladies auxiliary holding teas and other events, and I've read all about it, but it took some time to raise the capital to build that, what they called the new chapel, and I think that's what it says on the actual wall there. But yes, you're quite right. There's a large list of donors going back to the 1940s.
So when I look at moving from a building that might be approximately 9,000 square feet to a building that now incorporates a new 4,500 square feet, we're looking at 13,000 roughly square feet. The activities that happen in that new building, all of the activities are tied into what was the old facility that was torn down.
Precisely. It's the same operations, just in a nicer, newer, safer edition. So yes, that's exactly correct.
Thank you for your patience. Based on three sets of questioning, I think I have a much better understanding of where this is at. Thank you. I have no further questions, Ron.
I thank you. Mr. Story, I just have just a couple. I guess the old building wasn't tax exempt. It was taxable, was it not? Yeah.
That is my understanding. Yeah, but I also know that it was not reviewed or challenged. Yeah. So it was, unfortunately, I don't think it should have been, but in speaking with the executive director, again, it was a very old building. It had a very low assessment. So I assume that it just, it fell under the radar, so to speak, but it certainly should have been exempt, in my opinion.
Okay. So basically, my contention is, when did it come to light that the old property was paying taxes, and then they did the renovation and there was a supplementary, and now it's classified as taxable? So what happened during that time when you go from being taxable to, well, wait a second, it should be exempt?
So
I'm just wondering who brought that up, or what discussion led to the appeal?
Sure. So we saw the supplementary. It was reviewed by us, and I spoke with the executive director a number of times. I started doing my research because, again, this was not a ritual that I was which I was aware at the outset. So I started to read about it. I started to speak to the executive director, and I learned all about the work of the Holy Society and the ritual preparation. And I thought, wow, and as a as a North Winnipegger, I know the building. We know it has a Shalem as well. So when that new building came up, we reviewed the assessment, and the first thing, Mr. Mayor, that struck me was it seemed very odd on its face at first that the property was being dealt with as though it were two distinct properties, two roles, two civic addresses. So I explored that, and I recognized that no, they use one civic address, and they treat this property as a complex. So it seemed very odd at first that we all know that what goes on here is indeed based on religious observance. So it was odd that it was being classified as a funeral home. So upon further research, we found that no, what goes on here, in fact, is nothing like a market funeral home. In fact, they're not even registered with the province as a funeral home. And then visiting the property and seeing how the ritual is carried out. And then of course the very practical detail of the fact that the washrooms for the chapel are in the addition, and that part of the shamrim, the sitting vigil, sitting watch with the body, happens in the addition. It became more and more clear that the entirety of this property ought to be treated in the same manner. So to answer your question, I'm sorry, I'm giving you a bit of a long answer here, but we saw the supplementary, we reviewed it based on cost. We thought, okay, well, this is fine. The cost is not an issue, but the class code and liability issue was a bit perplexing. So we dug into it deeper. We spoke with the assessor. We thought maybe one of the ways to avoid a hearing would be to potentially merge the roles and exempt them both as one property. That would make sense to me, but the assessor was not, the department, we couldn't come to terms, let's say. So that's how we ended up here, asking for the board's advice on this matter.
All right.
I just have one more question, sorry.
Go ahead, Diane.
Okay, so a regular funeral home, they do not prepare the body in the funeral home, it goes to somewhere else, correct?
Nope. In many funeral homes, they do embalming. Some funeral homes have their own crematorium on site. Well, there's one that I'm aware of. It's the one right across from Brookside. So they actually have a crematorium, and that's licensed. There are 24 licensed crematoriums in Manitoba. Only one is within the city limits, which is sort of interesting. But typically embalming and that sort of work does go on site. So if you go to a place like the ones that I mentioned on Main Street, embalming and that sort of work would go on there. And actually, to be fair, many of those larger private funeral homes will have their own crematorium, and they will typically be in just outside of the city limits. Right. I presume that's a zoning issue, but it's one business. So if you're at Voyages and they have a crematorium in St. Andrews, let's say, or some such thing, then it's all part of one business.
And is that taxable at Voyage for the preparation of the body?
Yeah, so all of the private funeral homes are taxable from what I can see, unless Mr. Valderram has evidence to the contrary. My understanding is that all public funeral homes or private market funeral homes are taxable because they're not places of where religious observance happens by their very nature. So the chapels that typically are attached will be best described, I suppose, as non-denominational, where our chapel is actually a former synagogue. So services.
Just going back to that statement of not all chapels have services in it by a minister, virtually is what you're saying. They do have services with ministers in them.
Oh no, I'm saying that they do, but the premise itself is not specifically for any one denomination.
Not any one, but all can come in and use it.
Exactly.
Because for whatever reason they do them there. But is this the only Jewish site in Winnipeg that does this, or is there another one that does this? And if so, that other one that does it, is it taxable or non-taxable?
Okay, so this is the only group of Hevra Kaddish, so the Holy Society, who do this in Winnipeg. I know that at some point, Temple Shalom on Grant was looking into creating their own group who does this, but that's in a synagogue, so that would be that would inherently be
A church.
exempt
whatever,
as a church place of
yeah.
worship.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chair, I do have a point of clarification I want to add as well, if you don't mind.
Go ahead.
Mr. Story, I'm going to page 5 of your evidence and looking at your definition of partial exemptions or exemptions.
Yes.
What I'm hearing you say is that this preparation ritual is part of the religious worship ritual that the Jewish faith has.
Absolutely. Yes.
And it is
100%.
done for nonprofit. It is not a commercial enterprise, just emphasizing that point.
Yes. 100% absolutely correct. Yes.
As far as what we know happens in funeral homes, is they prepare the body for burial, for whatever, cremation or burial.
Correct.
And it is done on a for-profit basis.
Absolutely. Yes.
Typically, as far as I know.
As far as I know, yes, that's precisely correct. Yep.
Thank you for that clarification. I'm
Thank you, sir.
done, Mr. Chair.
I thank you. Mr. Story, I just have just a couple more little questions.
Sure.
I note that they when they did the addition, or the supplementary, that building doesn't have any sprinkler system.
I saw that. Yes, it says non-sprinklered. That's
Yeah,
I did see that.
So how did they get that approved?
Oh, I'm not sure. I'm not sure. I've spent so much time on the exemption issue. I didn't. No, it's a good. You know what? It's. I noticed that too. I'm not sure. Perhaps I don't know. I'd be speculating. I don't know.
Okay. Just one other thing here. I think. Okay, I think we covered off everything there. So, all right, okay. Now we'll go to Mr. Valderrama for your presentation and talk about the liability.
Mr. Chair, if I may, I'm just gonna present a rebuttal evidence.
All right. Okay.
Before I proceed to my main evidence.
Okay. Then we'll deal with the rebuttal. So
it's the one with the title rebuttal evidence for 1023 Main Street.
Sally, are you okay with that and pass that along to us?
Yeah, it is in your SharePoint folder as items 3 and 4 ATD rebuttal.
Right at the bottom, Ron.
Okay. I have it. Okay.
So it has a title or first page that says rebuttal evidence for 1023 Main Street. It has a picture.
Yeah.
And I was just
I think we're all okay, Mr. Vanderama. We're all okay, so you may proceed and talk about the rebuttal.
Everyone's on it. Okay, it's just a quick Google search that I did regarding the property and the adjacent one. If we look at on page 1, as per Google search, the adjacent property located at 1027 Main Street is a Jewish community funeral chapel, in which just the billboard sign alone recognizes that it is a funeral chapel in which funeral services is held. It was also confirmed during an inspection. I had the privilege of inspecting the property, the subject property, and of course the connecting property. And as indicated by Rina Boroditsky, the executive director, that the subject property located at 1023 Main Street held only funeral services and funeral works based on Jewish ritual of preparing the body for burial. Although the preparation of the body for burial may have specific religious tradition, it is clear that the property is being used or is used as a funeral home and not as a church. If we proceed to the next page, this is the website of sorry if I mispronounce this. She said Shell MS. The website indicates it's a Winnipeg's non-profit burial society serving Jewish communities since 1930. She said Shell MS is a non-profit organization mandated to prepare members of the Jewish community for burial according to tradition. Each person is treated with the same consideration and respect. No one is refused service due to financial hardship. I believe that was in Mr. Story's evidence or testimony. And on the last page, I do have, it says here, our chapel. I'll go on. Our chapel was opened in November 1947. As it was discussed earlier between Mr. Whitbread and Mr. Story, I think they had that discussion. It was 1947 and served for many years as a venue for community concerts, synagogue services, and social events. It is clear that it was used as a synagogue back then. Currently, used solely as a venue for funeral services. We can accommodate 300 attendees on the main floor. We have assisted hearing devices on hand for use by attendees. Kohanim may view funeral services online from our new facility, which is adjacent to the chapel. So with this, this is just my rebuttal evidence, Mr. Chair.
All right, I thank you. Mr. Story, any questions in regards to the rebuttal?
I do, Mr. Chair. I have a couple of questions. I'm a bit confused, Mr. Valderrama, because it seems that we're agreeing on what goes on here. But sorry, on your first page, your point of contention is with the sign on the building?
No, it's not. It just recognizes the fact that it is a funeral chapel.
Okay, and based on the fact that you've included everything that goes on here about the ritual preparation of the body, and you even mentioned the Kohanim, who are considered the priestly class in the Orthodox religion. So does what you've submitted here not support exactly what we've been saying? That it's, I'm not saying it's a church, but we are saying that what goes on here would be broadly classified as a place of worship where religious observation takes place.
Well, I do believe in the Jewish faith that they do their worship services in a synagogue, or they have a synagogue services as indicated on page 3. However, it continues and goes on that says currently used solely as a venue for funeral services. So there was a distinction, or there is a distinction on their website of what a synagogue service is and what a funeral service is.
Right. Okay. And a place of worship is not limited to a church or a synagogue. It could be any place that is, would you agree with me, that it's any place that is specifically designed where individuals or a congregation perform acts of devotion, veneration, or worship? Is that not the definition of a place of worship?
Well, maybe I should flip that in the form of question, rhetorical question. I've attended a few personally. I've attended a few funeral services, and there are religious traditions where we held some, we call it, some people would call it necrological service and services, some would say funeral service, and it's religious based. And these funeral chapels are assessed as funeral homes. Putting a funeral home or making a funeral home geared towards a specific congregation or group of people with religious tradition doesn't qualify it as a church just because they follow certain guidelines on how to prepare the body of the dead and how to prepare the families or the friends that were left behind by the departed person. I do believe that there is a distinction between a funeral home and a church based on what the act is indicating of what a church is or a church use is.
Okay.
A church, we can go back to the Municipal Assessment Act and look at the church, or the uses of a church, there are only three things. First, as a place of worship. Second, a retreat house, or geared towards the religious denomination or whatever the religious tradition is in terms of the retreat house. And the third one is the religious imparting of I will just code it. Sorry, Mr. Chair, I just
Religious
lost the
instruction? Is that
religious instructional
okay?
purposes.
Okay.
Now, do we define religious instructional purposes in terms of how to deal with the dead? I think it's a different conversation. The religious instructional purposes, I do believe, in my opinion, is more on geared towards educating the parishioners or the congregation or the group or a new believer or a new member on how to worship the Lord or the God that they worship, or how to live life according to the religious tradition that they are in.
Okay.
So it's more for propagating the religion and any processes of a I don't want to say for lack of a better term, Mr. Chair, for in terms of processing or dealing with a dead person or dead body and dealing with the grieving loved ones, I do in terms of how you want it, how to comfort them, the loved ones that the departed has left. I think it may be a religious tradition based or maybe secular based, and also in dealing with in treating the departed, it may be religious based or it may be medical based or secular based. So it's a choice by the family or by the departed one based on the will or whatever. So treating this religious
Sorry, Mr.
instructional
Valderrama,
purposes.
we're getting very far away from the question that I asked you.
Yeah.
I'm asking you about, you're suggesting that based on what you're saying, the only exemptions should be for churches, but we're talking about places of worship. Now, clearly, there are a multitude of religions, and a broad definition of a place of worship, would you not agree, is a place where a congregation comes to perform acts of veneration, devotion, or worship? That's a simple question. Is that not what a real place of worship is?
How different is that from other chapels, funeral chapels that we do worship also during the time that there's a death?
Sure.
But
so
then
are those private funeral chapels owned by non-profit holy burial societies, for one? That would be the first question.
No, they're not.
Right. And typically they're either family owned in Winnipeg or they're owned by larger conglomerates, correct? They're private. They're in the private market. They're not
whether they're owned by private or non-profit, or they're all treated the same way. They are all funeral homes.
Okay,
and whether it is based religious based or tradition based or secular based, it doesn't matter how you run your business. It's still a funeral home.
Okay, we agree though that this is not a business, correct? Hesed Shalemis is not a business. They're registered federally as a charity, correct?
Non-profit organization, and they're doing business in the term. I'm using the term very loosely here. The business term that I'm using is the operation. Sorry.
Right. So they're not
whether
doing
it's
business, so they're providing a service. And what they do here, and you walk through with me, you saw the prayers on the wall, you saw all of the religious regalia that happens here.
Yes,
would you not agree with me that everything that goes on in this property, whether it be the chapel or the addition, is indeed faith-based?
Faith-based funeral services.
Sure. Oh, well, okay. Faith-based funeral services, except, can we agree that this is not a licensed funeral home?
Yes, it's not licensed funeral home, but should it be licensed in the first place? I'm not sure. We don't know.
Well, no, because in order to be licensed, would you not agree in your research on this file that the reason they require licensing is so that the standards can be maintained, because they're doing invasive procedures such as embalming, and they're also effectively they're doing the services that they're providing are far different than the volunteers of the Hebra Kaddish. So a funeral director has to go to school, an embalmer has to go to school, the funeral home has to be registered, whereas we have devotees of the faith who volunteer as part of the Holy Burial Society to ritually wash and prepare the body. It's literally the pouring of 27 quarts of water over the deceased and the placement of a shroud. This is worlds apart from what happens at a private funeral home. Would you not agree with that?
No, it's just faith based. That's the only difference. But in my view, it's still the same. I don't want to sound like it's so morbid that we talk about these things, but we can't deny the fact that there is still something done for the departed and those people who are left behind. They are grieving. It's a place for them to for the departed or the body to be processed in such a way that it is based on their tradition and religion.
Right.
Some other funeral homes will honor that. For example, there's one. It caters to one specific group. It's located on Selkirk. It's the Aboriginal funeral home.
Right.
They have their own tradition, although they are licensed. Of course, they have funeral directors and all that. However,
Right.
they
So
are
it's
catered
different.
to specific. They are catered to specific tradition. Why are they licensed? They probably have a formal funeral director, and they
Right. And they
whatever
probably
process
provide
they do.
embalming and cremation, correct? And they're for profit, right?
And some of the functions of a funeral director may be done loosely or not formally by the volunteers themselves or on the body, but it may not be as far as being invasive or being what we're familiar with in terms of in the other funeral homes. But there can be crossovers if we really look into it. There are some. I'm not saying all of the functions of a funeral director are being done by executive director or whoever is doing in the 1023 Main Street.
Yeah, I don't agree, because that would then why would you go to
We
school
could-
to be a funeral director if a funeral
another-
director is effectively selling the packages of when somebody dies at a regular market funeral home, right? It's completely different, and they're not, and then nothing they do is prescribed by religious law. So I guess we can go in circles about this, but
wouldn't you agree, Mr. Story, that when we went there was also what do you call a coffin, but although again it's based on religion, based on the Jewish practice of
yes.
But it's a coffin in itself, right? In general, if we look at it, it's a coffin.
Well, it's a
casket.
Casket. Okay. So it's a traditional pine casket with a Star of David on it,
right.
And these are once again, if we go back to the tradition, Jewish burial is supposed to be non-ostentatious, and the idea is that you leave the world as you come in. So the boxes are not ornate; they're pine boxes. Mm-hmm. They will typically have 4 holes at the bottom, and that's also prescribed by custom and religious law. And then it has the Star of David on the top. The shrouds that are tied in such a way as to pay reverence to the name of God, that's done there. That's very different. And even the shrouds that are sewn by the volunteers of the Hebra Kaddish. And the material is actually donated as well. So nothing about this that goes on here, other than the presence of the deceased, has any it does not bear any resemblance to a private funeral home. It is very, very different. It's an end of life ritual and a preparation for burial, but it is far, far different than what goes on at a private funeral home. So, and now, sorry, these are my questions. So I just wanted to ask you one more thing. I see this simply a picture of Wojcik's. That's right across the street. Sorry, did you speak to this?
No, not yet. I was about to get into it.
Okay. That's a crematorium as well, correct?
Right, it is.
Okay.
And
Sorry.
all I'm gonna say about that is that it caters to all faiths and beliefs. It says in there.
Precisely. So it's not faith-based.
It may
No.
not be faith-based exclusively. However, they're still catering to any faiths and any beliefs or any tradition.
Right. And that would be the opposite of a uniquely faith-based organization.
Well, it was for this property, for the subject property, it was just narrowed down to one belief, one religion, and the others, they cater to a lot of other traditions and beliefs and religions. My example would be as I've mentioned, is the Aboriginal funeral home, which is catered to one tradition, and so yeah, that's it.
Okay. I don't have any questions, Mr. Chair.
I thank you. I think we are doing the rebuttal. So, Ms. Knight, do you have any questions of Mr. Vanderama's rebuttal?
Well, just the whole thing again, because I'm just a little confused. So a regular of this Wojcik's funeral home, for example, or funeral chapel and cremation, they're fully taxed, correct?
Yes, they are, ma'am.
And they do not only Jewish services, they do Catholic services, Anglican services, non-faith services, whatever anybody wants.
Yes, they do, ma'am. Yes.
And you know that
correct.
they do Jewish, can't even speak. You know that they do Jewish services, correct?
I haven't attended one in any Jewish in any other yet, ma'am, but I believe they will cater to it as well.
Okay, so I'm not sure if my question is for you or for Mr. Story now, but
It's okay.
what is the funeral or there's a Jewish place in West Kildonan down by
West Kildonan.
Inkster. There's a synagogue there. Does that also do funerals there?
Sorry, ma'am, I can't
Think
I
of
can't answer the question as I'm
I
not
know.
familiar if they do any funeral work or any funeral services.
Yeah,
Sorry.
Ms. Knight, are you thinking of there used to be, it's actually very interesting. There were many synagogues in the North End, West Kildonan.
Yes.
Now there are very few. The oldest synagogue in the North End is called Ashkenazi, and it's on the corner of, testing my memory, it's Charles and Burroughs.
No, that's not what I'm thinking of.
Okay, there's one at 700 Jefferson. But there was Rosh Pina, and they joined with another congregation to form Etz Chaim, and they now moved. They were on Matheson as a joint.
That's the one I'm thinking of, the one on Matheson.
So that's a great point. So the one on Matheson actually has the Rosh Pina housing co-op attached to it. That's a synagogue. But they have since moved to the South End. So the demographics are such that there are not that many active synagogues in the North End. Certainly not compared to, say, 50 years ago. And I just wanted to make one quick point of clarification. Ms. Knight, you asked if Jewish funerals would take place at Wojcik. I just want to be very clear that the type of funerary service that we're talking about at Hesed Shalemis is based on a certain level of orthodoxy. So I'm not suggesting that the Kropos and the Wojciks of the world would ever turn away Jewish folks. That's not the case. But if you are part of the congregation who believes in a higher level of or a more a higher level of orthodoxy, let's say, then Hesed Shalemis is the only place that provides the ritual Tahara and Shmira service. That they are the only ones, and I believe that they're the only ones from. They have folks coming from Alberta to Kenora, basically. We have very few of these in Canada, and in our little region here in the prairies, it is uniquely rare. So,
So
Logics, as I say,
where is there another unit that is the same as this unit? You said in Alberta?
yes. So they're called the Hevra Kaddish, and these are the Holy Societies. Now they exist in Alberta. I know they exist in Ontario, and I certainly know that they're active in Quebec. But this is the only one in Manitoba.
Okay, so those other ones in Alberta, Ontario, and Quebec, are they fully taxed or not taxed at all?
Not sure. It's a good question. I
Okay.
don't know. They may have a different legislation, I'm sure. But
I was trying to get an answer.
yeah, no,
Okay.
it's very unique. But I think, as I mentioned, and now that we're a little deeper into this, one thing that I did mention is that on the corner of it's McGregor and Hartford, there is a Chabad Lubavitch mikveh, which is a small synagogue. It's standalone,
Yeah.
and then the mikveh is in its own building right next door.
Okay.
Now the mikveh is that's the Hebrew term for ritual purification.
Right.
That's what goes on in that building, and it's completely exempt. And frankly, our property is not that far away from the corner of McGregor and Hartford.
So going back to that property that you're talking about at McGregor and whatever, it has a faith-based place where they can have the service at as well.
It's a synagogue.
In the next door, you said it's separate, right?
It's one roll, so it's one piece of property, and it's mixed in residential with residential, but it's on that corner,
Right.
and right on the corner is a small older synagogue, and then directly adjacent to it, but on the same roll, is a separate building, which is the Chabad Lubavitch mikveh, and that entire roll is exempt.
Okay.
So once again, it is being used for ritual purification, and it's exempt. So effectively, what we're doing here, we can call it a funeral, we can call it a mortuary, but what goes on in this building is religious observance based on ritual purification.
The difference between that building and the other building that you're talking about, that's totally exempt, has actual services on Saturday in it.
I believe so. I can't confirm that, but I believe so. And I don't know that our property would not have services at some point in the future, but as we mentioned, the changing demographics, I don't know how much desire there is, for example, for or need. But it's not to say that. I mean, clearly, this property and the city agrees. It's the chapel element is still used for religious observation.
Right,
so
right.
the addition to it should also be used for religious observation.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Whitbread, you have any questions in regards to Mr. Valderrama's rebuttal?
I have a couple of things I'd like to pursue, if you don't mind. First, when I look at page 5 of Mr. Story's evidence, if you can go back to that, you look at when the property is used as a church, synagogue, or place of religious worship. What I'm hearing you say, I think, with your lengthy presentation, Mr. Valderrama, is that you are clearly suggesting to us or stating to us that you don't believe the preparation of the body, the wrapping of it, the services in a chapel with all of the religious iconry that would surround and which we saw in the photos is part of the religious worship of the Jewish faith.
They are.
I believe
sorry.
Let me finish. I believe your representation said it is not part of a religious faith or religious worship. That's a yes or no.
No, I didn't. I'm not in that belief. It's a religious tradition which is it is a religious tradition of burying or before burial for the Jewish faith. I agree with that. It's just that I just having a difficult time grasping a funeral home becoming a church. or being exempted because of a religious instructional purpose.
I think I'm not talking about religious instructional purpose here. I'm talking about religious faith and the doctrines, the very stern doctrines of the Jewish faith that tell us this is the way we prepare a body for burial and no other way.
No, I'm not suggesting that it is not of the Jewish faith, sir. It's
no religious worship, part of
religious worship. I guess it's more of understanding religious worship in my view, in my opinion, sir. It's more of worship. We worship and we hold services and all. It's all tied in the use of the property, sir.
Yeah, I'll leave
So
that
it's
alone. Mr. Chair, I need to ask you a question of procedure. If I have knowledge of something in terms of the evidence that's been presented by Mr. Valderrama, for example, Wojciech's funeral home, am I able to share it here and ask him about it?
I'd sooner you stick to the property itself, Mr. Whitbread.
But he's brought the Wojciech's funeral chapel into play in his evidence in relation to the property across the street.
All right, then I think it's fair to ask a question then. Yep.
Okay, I'll think about how I posture this question.
Okay.
I don't want to cause a problem.
Yeah.
Mr. Valderrama, do you know what Wojciech's would tell you if you phoned them and asked them if they prepare bodies for a Jewish funeral service?
no, I wouldn't be able to know, no, until I ask, or if I ask them.
Would you be surprised to learn that they might say to you, there is a chapel across the street that does that, and you might wish to consider doing that, albeit if you insist, we can prepare a body for service, but there is a fee for service. It's not a non-profit, it's a fee for service. Would you be surprised to hear that?
No, I wouldn't be able to answer the question, sir. Not I have no knowledge of it. No, I'm sorry.
Okay, I won't give evidence, Mr. Chair. I'll just leave it at that. Thank you. No further points.
Thank you. I think at this point, Mr. Valderrama, I think we're going to turn it over to you in regards to the city's knowledge in regards to liability.
Yes, Mr. Chair. I'm just gonna go through some pages of my evidence towards the last, page 10. Starting page 10, Mr. Chair, and just a few pages. It's just a free press article that I have attached here on page 10. It's for your reading pleasure if you want. It's just an article from Free Press entitled "Funeral Facility Ready for Service," and on page 14 is the permit that indicates it is or the type of work is to construct a new funeral parlor. I believe we have already discussed this earlier with Mr. Story. So just gonna go over with the next one, which is on page 16. It's just the website of said Shell MS. And I think that's just for my main evidence, Mr. Chair.
All right, I thank you. Mr. Story, questions of Mr. Valderrama?
I do, sir, and I'll be expedient. We've talked a lot about this, but just a couple of questions. Mr. Valderrama, page 1, the property type is funeral home, as we've been over a number of times. What are the conditions for this use code to be applied? What conditions need to be satisfied in order for the city to deem a property a funeral home?
Firstly, we look at the permit. It indicates funeral home, and there's a category in our assessment that it is there's a funeral home use code that we apply on this type of property, on this kind of property.
So to be clear, the
And
city doesn't
also-
require a funeral home to be registered or licensed as a funeral home for the city to apply that, the application of that use code. Is that correct?
No, I'm not aware of it. No.
Okay. And we mentioned, I think we've been through this, but I think we can broadly agree that typically funeral homes, from our understanding, don't offer ritual preparation of the deceased. Mr. Whitbread brought up a good point. If you go to Kropo, if you go to Wojcik, can we agree that they're not going to have a Hevra Kaddish who can perform the rituals based on orthodoxy? Is that a fair comment in your mind?
Couldn't speak to it as I am not aware of what they're going to say anyway.
Okay. And now the the owner, Hasidic Association of Winnipeg, you're not disputing that that is indeed a religious nonprofit dedicated to the advancement of the religion. Is that fair?
They are as far as I know, based on their website as well, they are in charge of funeral services as well. So I wouldn't deny that in their registration, and also I wouldn't discount the fact that they are also in charge of funeral services.
Okay. And in terms of, now you visited the property, and I appreciate that you came down to see it, but can we agree that what we discovered during this inspection, just from a practical, in practical terms, the chapel does not have its own washrooms, correct?
I did not notice that, so I cannot answer the question. Sorry.
But Ms. Boroditsky did say to us during the tour that chapel doesn't have its own washrooms. Are you aware of that?
I couldn't recall. No, I'm sorry.
Okay. Now, in your experience with the city of Winnipeg, if someone were to apply for an occupancy permit for a building without washrooms, they would be denied, would they not? It's
I'm
a
not
requirement
sure.
It's a requirement to have washrooms in order to have occupancy in a building, correct?
I'm not sure. I don't.
Okay.
I don't know what the permit is.
Okay.
It's requiring.
Okay. And then this free press article, I noticed that you missed a couple of paragraphs. I assume that's
it's just a
error.
cut and paste. No, but I quoted the website, so it's easy to refer to it.
Okay. And then it does, just to be very clear, your evidence here supports what I'm saying. It talks about the ritual cleaning. It talks about the 24 quarts of water. And it does indeed say, Hesed Shalemis does not embalm bodies, and the organization is not a licensed funeral home, but a non-profit religious society that performs a ritual service, correct?
Yes, it is in there.
Okay. Okay, and then just okay, and then in page 15, you've got the beginning of the website, and that's fine. But it further supports what we're saying, that this is where the Tahara ritual preparation of the deceased takes place. And is it my understanding that your position or the city's position are that these rituals that are prescribed by halakhic, a Jewish religious law, do not constitute an expression of faith or worship? Is that the city's position?
I'm not saying that. There's a tradition being done in the funeral home. It's just that it is a funeral home.
Okay. I think those are my questions, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Valderrama.
I thank you. I think Mr. Story, we're going to go to, and just for the record, classification.
This is for 23. Yeah, classification only.
Yeah.
And Mr. Chair, I'm going to ask that my comments carry forward. I think we've, I will, unless there's anything you'd like me to speak to specifically, I think we've sort of covered our bases here. So I will simply ask that my request for 23 mirror my request for the previous SUP. It's all the same argument. And in the interest of time and for the sake of expediency, I'd like to ask that my comments carry forward, and I'd be happy to address any questions the panel may have.
Right. All right, thank you. Mr. Vanderama, questions?
None, Mr. Chair.
All right, thank you. Ms. Knight, any questions in regards to classification?
I think we've asked everything we could think of already.
I thank you. Mr. Whitbread?
Only one to Mr. Story. Will you please make an application to merge these into one property so we would have a simpler process in the future?
Well, yes, I would love that. We did actually start that way. My concern is that they merge them and don't exempt them, of course. So that's why it's essential that we come to the board. But it's that was my first inclination as well. So
okay. I have no other questions, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
All right, thank you. In regards to quantum, there is no arguments in regards to quantum, gentlemen?
You are correct, sir.
All right. Mr. Vanderama, summary if you wish.
Just a quick one, a quick note. It's just in my view, subject property has not, in my view, the subject property has not satisfied the conditions set by Municipal Act 22(1)(I), primarily used as either a church, synagogue, or place of religious worship, or even used as a religious or for religious instructional purposes. And that's all that I have, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Vanderama. Mr. Story, your
Yes,
final
sir.
word, sir.
Thank you very much, sir. So first of all, thank you to everyone for listening to our discussion here today. It is a unique property and it has some unique challenges, and I understand that it's a bit of an interesting issue. But what I'd like to leave you with is ultimately we are suggesting that the goings on in this property are commensurate with what I will broadly call acts of religious worship. I don't think the assessor necessarily disagrees with me based on his evidence and based on some of the testimony. We can agree that this property is not a traditional funeral home. And we can also agree that it's somewhat illogical or odd or whatever that one half of the building is exempt and the other that serves as an ancillary or as an addition to what we'll call the main holding is not exempt. That seems inequitable in a unique way. I've also pointed out the mikveh on Hartford and McGregor, and I think that's a good comparable. I will point out as well that this is not an issue where there's only one of these, so it's very unique. So it's not a floodgate issue where if this is exempt, then all of a sudden there are a number of others that should be reconsidered. It's very unique. There's no doubt in our mind that this property is used for acts of religious devotion, veneration, and worship. All acts that happen, all activities on site are indeed guided by the religious principles of the Orthodox Jewish faith. And you've heard our submission. I've left you with some information regarding Hesed Shalemis, the good work of the Shever Kaddish, and I will once again respectfully submit that the property be exempt on the grounds that it absolutely, without a doubt in my mind, satisfies the conditions as a place of worship, as all of the activity that goes on here is based on religious veneration, devotion, and worship. So once again, I thank you for your time, and we do respectfully submit that the property ought to be exempt and the entire complex be treated equitably and fairly. And with that, I thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Story. Thank you for your attendance and results very soon. So have a pleasant day and thank you very kindly.
Wonderful. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Mr. Vanderama, I think
Yes.
This probably concludes your part here. So have a pleasant day and thank you for your presentations. We have heard the item scheduled and this hearing is now adjourned.
Have a good one, everyone.
Thank you.
See you. I think we'll probably take maybe a 10-minute break.